When 15-year-old Caleb Morrison walked away from the foreclosed farmhouse with nothing but a backpack, a sleeping bag, and a three-legged dog named Jackson. Nobody in Coalfield County expected to see him again. Most figured he'd end up in the foster system or worse, another casualty of the poverty that had been strangling these Appalachian mountains for generations. But 6 months later, when a lost hiker stumbled onto what Caleb had built deep in the woods above Copper Creek, word spread through the valley like wildfire. The boy with nothing had created something nobody could quite believe, a paradise carved out of scrap and sweat, and the kind of desperate hope that either kills you or makes you extraordinary. This is the story of how losing everything became the beginning of something beautiful, and how a kid and his dog proved that wealth has nothing to do with money and everything to do with what you're willing to build with your own two hands. The foreclosure notice had gone up on a Tuesday morning in March, nailed to the door of the only home Caleb had ever known. His father had been gone for 2 years, disappeared into the opioid crisis that had gutted half the county, and his mother had followed 6 months later, her liver finally giving out after a lifetime of trying to drink away the pain of loving a man who couldn't be saved. Caleb had been living alone in the house since then, hiding the truth from social services, paying what bills he could with money from odd jobs, chopping firewood, fixing machinery, doing anything that put cash in hand and kept the lights on. But the back taxes had piled up beyond anything a 15-year-old could earn, and the bank didn't care about orphans or effort, or the fact that this land had been in the Morrison family for 4 generations. He'd watched from the woods as they changed the locks, as they put up the auction signs, as they made his past into a transaction. Jackson sat beside him, the old coonhound mix who'd lost his back left leg to a coyote trap years ago, but never lost his spirit. The dog leaned against Caleb's leg, a warm, solid presence that meant more than any words could. When the county vehicle finally pulled away, Caleb made his decision. He wasn't going into the system, wasn't going to let them put him in some group home 3 counties over, wasn't going to lose the mountains that were the only family he had left besides Jackson. He was going up into the high country where the logging roads ended and the real wilderness began, where his grandfather had taken him hunting and taught him to read the land, where a person could disappear if they were careful and determined and had no other choice. He took what he could carry. A good knife his grandfather had left him, a hatchet, a tarp, the sleeping bag, 2 changes of clothes, a pot and a pan, waterproof matches and a fire starter, the small amount of food left in the cupboards, beans and rice and oatmeal, things that would last, a fishing line and hooks, a first aid kit. It all fit in the hiking backpack his father had used back when his father was still a person instead of a ghost. Caleb left the door unlocked behind him. He had no use for keys to a place that wasn't his anymore. The first week in the wilderness nearly killed him. It was late March in the mountains of eastern Kentucky, and spring was more a rumor than a reality. Nighttime temperatures still dropped below freezing, and the rain came in horizontal sheets that found every gap in his makeshift shelter. He'd hiked 8 miles up Copper Creek, then another 3 miles up a tributary barely wide enough to jump across, until he found a place that felt right, a natural hollow backed by a limestone cliff, sheltered by old-growth hemlocks, with a spring bubbling out of the rocks and a southern exposure that would catch maximum sun. He built his first shelter against the cliff face, leaning branches and covering them with the tarp, piling leaves and pine needles for insulation. It was crude and cold and leaked when the wind shifted, but it was his. Jackson adapted faster than Caleb did. The old dog's hunting instincts came back, and he'd disappear into the brush and return with rabbits, squirrels, once a groundhog that fed them for 3 days. Caleb set up a fishing line in the creek and pulled out brook trout, their sides brilliant with spawning colors. He found ramps growing on the hillside and dandelion greens in the sunny spots, and learned all over again the lessons his grandfather had taught him about what the forest offered if you knew how to look. He was hungry all the time anyway, his body burning through calories faster than he could replace them, but he didn't starve. Every day he woke up free and still himself, still Caleb Morrison and not a case number in some social worker's file, was a day he'd won. By the end of April, the real work began. Survival wasn't enough anymore. Caleb wanted to build something, to create rather than just endure. He started improving the shelter, using the hatchet to cut proper poles, weaving a frame, layering it with bark stripped from dead hemlocks. He dug a fire pit lined with creek stones and built a chimney of rocks and mud that actually drew smoke out instead of suffocating him. He made a door from woven branches that kept out the worst of the wind. The shelter grew from a crude lean-to into something that almost resembled a cabin, tucked so perfectly into the landscape that you could walk within 20 feet and never see it. He found the old logging site in May, maybe a mile from his camp, where timber cutters had worked decades ago and left behind their trash and treasure. There were cables and chains too heavy to haul out, rusted tools, a broken saw blade, even an old barrel stove with a cracked side that Caleb thought he might be able to use. Over the course of weeks, he carried back what he could use, making trip after trip, Jackson limping along beside him, the two of them like scavengers building a nest from the leavings of the human world. The stove changed everything. Caleb patched the crack with creek clay mixed with ash, fitted it with a pipe made from tin cans hammered flat and rolled, and installed it in his shelter. The first night it worked, pushing heat into every corner of his small space. He actually cried. He hadn't realized how tired he was of being cold, how much energy he'd been spending, just trying to stay warm. With the stove, evenings became almost comfortable. He could dry his clothes. He could heat water for washing. He could sit and think and plan instead of just huddling for warmth. Summer brought abundance. The forest exploded with life, and Caleb learned to be part of its rhythms rather than fighting against them. He found blackberry brambles and ate until his fingers were purple. He located bee trees and robbed them carefully, getting stung but gaining honey that made everything taste like luxury. He set snares and caught rabbits and woodchucks, smoking the meat over his fire to preserve it. He tended a small garden patch where he planted seeds saved from the vegetables he'd brought, beans and squash that somehow grew in the thin mountain soil enriched with compost and fish guts. He made friends with the land, learned where the deer trails ran, where the turkey roosted, where the ginseng grew thick enough to harvest a few roots without depleting it. Jackson thrived in ways the dog never had down in the valley. His coat got thick and glossy. His eyes were bright. He'd found his purpose as Caleb's partner and guardian, sleeping across the shelter door at night, alerting to any danger, bringing back game, providing companionship that kept loneliness from becoming despair. Caleb talked to the dog constantly, working through problems out loud, and Jackson would cock his head and listen with an attention that felt like understanding. It was in late June when Caleb realized he wasn't just surviving anymore. He was happy, genuinely deeply happy in a way he couldn't remember being since before his father left. Maybe ever. He'd wake with the sun and spend his days doing work that mattered, tending the garden, improving the shelter, exploring the forest, fishing, gathering, building. Every skill he developed was a skill that directly improved his life. Every improvement to his camp was something he could see and use and be proud of. There was no money, no electricity, no running water except the spring, no internet or phone or connection to the world below, and he didn't miss any of it. He built furniture from branches lashed together with cordage he twisted from basswood bark. A bed frame that got him off the ground, a table, a chair, shelves where he organized his possessions, the fishing gear, the tools, the dishes he'd made from carved wood and clay. He made oil lamps from clay and animal fat that gave him light after dark. He constructed a root cellar dug into the hillside where the temperature stayed cool even in summer. He diverted a trickle from the spring into a small pool where he could wash, and built a sauna from stones and a frame covered in hides, where he could pour water over hot rocks and steam the tiredness out of his muscles. The place became beautiful, not in a manicured, intentional way, but in the way that happens when human effort works with nature instead of against it. The garden was a wild tangle that still produced food. The shelter looked like it had grown out of the hillside. The fire ring was circled with log benches where Caleb would sit in the evenings, watching stars appear in the gap of sky above the creek, feeling more at peace than he'd ever imagined possible. He marked time by the phases of the moon and the progression of wildflowers and the migration of birds. He knew when the wood thrush arrived in spring and when they left in fall. He knew which trees the pileated woodpeckers favored and where the barred owl nested. He could predict weather by the behavior of insects and the quality of light. He became part of the forest story instead of separate from it, and the forest in turn sustained him. But even paradise has its intrusions. It was a Saturday in September, the leaves just beginning to turn, when Caleb heard voices. He froze, instantly alert. Jackson growled low in his chest. They'd been alone for 6 months, and human voices were as foreign and alarming as gunshots. Caleb grabbed the dog's collar, whispered him quiet, and moved silently toward the sound. 2 hikers, a man and a woman in their 30s, expensive gear, faces red with exertion and tight with fear. They were arguing in harsh whispers about which direction to go, clearly lost, the map in the man's hands doing them no good in terrain this rugged and unmarked. Caleb watched from cover, debating. His instinct was to hide, to let them pass, to protect his secret. But they were badly turned around, heading up a ridge that would dead-end in cliffs, and the afternoon was wearing on. They'd be out here in the dark, unprepared, possibly injured, trying to navigate by flashlight. His grandfather's voice echoed in his memory. "We help folks in the mountains, Caleb. Always have. It's what separates us from animals." He stepped out of the trees. "You're going the wrong way." They both jumped, the woman letting out a small scream. Up close, Caleb could see how lost they really were. Scratched, muddy, exhausted, the fear in their eyes giving way to desperate relief at seeing another person. "Oh, thank God," the man said. "We've been lost for hours. We were trying to summit Copper Peak, but we got turned around and the trail just disappeared," and he stopped, really looking at Caleb for the first time. A teenage kid in clothes that were clean but worn and patched, barefoot, a long knife on his belt, accompanied by a 3-legged dog. Not exactly what you expected to find in the deep wilderness. "Do you live out here?" "I know the way down," Caleb said, not answering the question. "Follow me. Stay close. It's about 3 miles to the logging road where you probably parked." He led them down, taking routes only someone who knew every inch of this country could follow. Across the creek at the shallow ford, along the ridge where the footing was solid, avoiding the laurel hills and deadfalls. He moved fast and they struggled to keep up, but he got them to the old logging road as the sun touched the western ridges. Their car was there, a new SUV that probably cost more than his family's farm had been worth. "Thank you," the woman said, and she meant it, the relief in her voice profound. "You probably saved our lives. We're from Lexington, and we just had no idea how easy it is to get disoriented out here. Can we give you something? Money? A ride somewhere?" "I'm good," Caleb said. "Just be more careful. Mountains aren't a playground." "Wait," the man said, studying him with an expression Caleb couldn't quite read. "Are you that kid? The Morrison boy? There were missing person reports months ago. People think you're dead or ran off to Cincinnati or—" Caleb felt his stomach drop. "I'm nobody," he said. "You folks have a safe drive." He turned and walked back into the trees, Jackson at his side, moving fast, his heart pounding. He'd been careless, stupid. He should have hidden, should have let them figure it out themselves. Now they knew, and they'd tell someone, and people would come looking. He hiked back to his camp in the gathering darkness, his mind racing. Would they call the police? Social services? Would there be search parties? He'd been so careful for 6 months, and now it might all fall apart because he'd tried to help someone. That night he barely slept, listening for sounds of pursuit, ready to grab his pack and disappear deeper into the wilderness if he had to. But the next day came quiet, and the day after. A week passed with no disturbance. He began to hope that maybe the hikers had kept quiet, or that nobody had believed them, or that the authorities simply didn't care enough about one more mountain kid to mount a serious search. Then, on a morning 2 weeks after the encounter, Caleb found the package. It was sitting on a rock near the place where the trail from the logging road reached the creek, wrapped in plastic, weighted down against the wind. Inside was a note written on expensive stationery. "Caleb, we didn't report you. What you've built is remarkable, and it's not our place to destroy it. But we were worried about you, so we're leaving supplies. There's more cached at this location if you need it. You saved us. This is us saying thank you and hoping you stay safe. If you ever need help, really need it, there's a phone number at the bottom. No judgment, no obligation. Take care of yourself and that good dog. Sarah and Mike Chen." Beneath the note was food, good food, backpacking meals and energy bars and instant coffee, and a first aid kit, a water filter, a warm jacket, and a headlamp with extra batteries. At the very bottom was $200 in cash. Caleb sat by the creek for a long time, holding the note, feeling something complicated and warm spreading through his chest. They'd kept his secret. More than that, they'd honored what he was doing, respected his choice, helped without trying to control. It was kindness of a sort he'd almost forgotten existed. He took the supplies back to camp and integrated them carefully into his stores. The jacket would be vital when winter came. The water filter would save him from boiling everything. The money he hid in a jar buried near the shelter, emergency insurance he hoped he'd never need. And he felt less alone than he had in months, knowing that somewhere out there were two people who knew about him and wished him well. Autumn transformed the mountains into something almost painfully beautiful. The maples and oaks blazed red and gold, and the forest floor became a carpet of color. Caleb spent his days preparing for winter, smoking fish and meat, gathering nuts, drying berries, cutting firewood and stacking it under a lean-to where it would stay dry. He insulated his shelter with packed leaves between double walls, made warmer clothes from deer hides he'd tanned using the brains and fat, built a better door, and sealed every gap against the wind. Jackson got a thick winter coat, and Caleb made him a bed near the stove lined with rabbit fur and grass. At night they'd sit together in the warmth, Caleb reading by lamplight from the one book he'd brought, a collection of Thoreau that seemed more relevant now than it ever had in school, while Jackson snored and twitched through dreams of running on 4 good legs. The first snow came in November, early and heavy, coating everything in white silence. Caleb woke to a transformed world and felt not fear but excitement. He'd prepared well. His shelter was tight and warm. He had food stored. He had firewood for months. He and Jackson were ready. Winter was hard but not unbearable. There were days when the cold was so intense that going outside felt dangerous, when the wind screamed down from the peaks and found every weakness in his walls, when he wondered if he'd made a terrible mistake. But there were also days of crystalline beauty, when the sun on snow was blinding and the icicles hanging from the cliff face looked like pipe organs made of light. When he and Jackson would hike through knee-deep powder and see no sign of any human but themselves, alone in a white wilderness that felt like the beginning of the world, he found he didn't mind the isolation. The silence was companionable rather than oppressive. His own company was enough, enriched by Jackson's presence and the constant engagement with the work of staying alive. Every day had purpose. Every action had consequence. There was no waste, no meaningless time, no hollow consumption of entertainment to fill the void. He was living deliberately, and it fed something in his soul that had been starving his whole life. Word of the wild boy and his dog spread through the valley in the way mountain gossip does. Half truth and half legend. Some people said he was crazy, others said he was dangerous. But a few understood what he was doing and respected it. He started finding packages at the creek crossing every few weeks, not always from the Chens but from others too. A box of books from someone anonymous, a bag of seed for spring planting with a note that said, "From a friend," a set of warm wool socks, new fishing line, a harmonica, which Caleb learned to play during the long winter evenings, the notes echoing off the hollow in a way that felt like prayer. The packages were always respectful, left at the boundary, never an intrusion into his space. Whoever was leaving them understood the rules of this arrangement. They could help, but they couldn't interfere. They could support, but they couldn't control. It was a form of community he'd never experienced before, one built on mutual respect and understanding rather than obligation or judgment. Spring returned with rushing water and birdsong, and an explosion of green so intense it almost hurt to look at. Caleb planted his garden bigger than before, using the seeds he'd saved and the new ones that had been gifted. He built raised beds from logs, improved his irrigation system, added a scarecrow that Jackson barked at for 3 days before accepting it as part of the landscape. He repaired winter damage to the shelter, reinforced the roof, built an addition that served as a workshop where he could craft tools and work on projects during rainy days. He was 16 now, though he'd stopped tracking birthdays as meaningless markers of time imposed by a world he no longer belonged to. He'd grown 3 inches and put on muscle from the constant physical work. His hands were calloused, his skin weathered, his hair long and sun-bleached. He looked like he'd been born to these mountains, like he'd never known anything else. In May, a reporter found the trail to his camp. Caleb heard her coming from 100 yards away. City people moved through the woods like they were angry at it, and he had time to decide how to handle it. He could hide and wait her out. He could confront her and drive her off, or he could face it head-on and control his own story. He chose the latter. When she emerged into the clearing in front of his shelter, out of breath and covered in pollen, he was sitting by the fire pit, Jackson beside him, waiting calmly. "Caleb Morrison?" she asked, though she clearly knew the answer. She was young, maybe late 20s, with a camera around her neck and a voice recorder in her hand. "I'm Jennifer Watts from the Lexington Herald. I've been hearing stories about you for months, and I had to see for myself. Would you talk to me? Tell me your story?" "Depends," Caleb said. "What are you going to do with it?" She was honest, he'd give her that. "Write an article. Maybe it goes viral, maybe it doesn't. But people are fascinated by what you've done. A kid who walked away from everything and built a life in the wilderness. In a world where everyone is glued to screens and working jobs they hate to buy things they don't need, you're doing something radical. You're actually free." They talked for 3 hours. Caleb showed her around, explained his systems for water and food and shelter, demonstrated skills, answered questions. He was careful about what he revealed, didn't give exact locations, didn't provide information that could be used to force him back into the system. But he was honest about why he'd left and what he'd found up here in the high country. "Aren't you lonely?" Jennifer asked at one point. Caleb considered it, scratching Jackson's ears. "I was lonelier in town, surrounded by people who didn't care if I lived or died than I've ever been up here." Jackson cares. The forest cares in its own way. It rewards attention and effort and punishes carelessness. And the people who leave supplies, they care. That's enough. "That's more than I had before. What about the future? You're 16. Don't you want to finish school, get a job, have a normal life?" "Normal for who?" Caleb shot back. "My normal was watching my parents destroy themselves, was poverty and hopelessness, was a system that valued property over people. This is better. I'm learning more living this way than I ever learned in school. I'm building skills that actually matter. And I'm happy." How many people working normal jobs can say that? The article came out 2 weeks later, and it did go viral. "The Boy Who Built Paradise: How a 16-year-old orphan created a life of radical freedom in the Kentucky wilderness." The photos Jennifer had taken showed Caleb's camp in all its rough beauty, and the story presented him not as a runaway or a victim, but as someone who'd made a choice and had the courage to live it. The response was overwhelming. The county social services issued a statement saying they were monitoring the situation, but taking no action since Caleb was safe, healthy, and would be aging out of the system soon anyway. The state police confirmed they'd checked on him and found him competent and not a danger to himself or others. But mostly, people sent support. Hundreds of packages arrived at the general store in Coalfield, addressed to Caleb Morrison, care of Copper Creek. The store owner, a man named Earl who'd known Caleb's grandfather, sent word through the network that the packages were piling up. Caleb hiked down one evening and found Earl waiting with a pickup truck bed full of boxes. "Hey, you've got fans, kid," Earl said with a grin. "Half the country wants to be you or wants to help you be you, I can't tell which." They sorted through it together. There was gear. Good quality camping equipment, tools, books, seeds, first aid supplies, solar panels and batteries, warm clothes, more food than Caleb could carry in 10 trips. There were letters, hundreds of them, from people sharing their own stories of feeling trapped, of wanting to live differently, of being inspired by what he'd done. There were cash donations that totaled over $15,000. "I don't need charity," Caleb said, staring at the money. "It's not charity," Earl said. "It's people investing in a different way of living. You're proof it can be done. That's worth something to folks who've forgotten how to be free." Caleb took what he could use and asked Earl to distribute the rest to other families in the county who were struggling. The money he put in a bank account Earl helped him set up, emergency funds in case of medical crisis or some future need. The letters he brought back to camp in batches and read by firelight, each one a small window into another person's life, another person's dreams of escape or change or meaning. One letter stood out. It was from a man named Robert Chen, Mike Chen's father, one of the hikers Caleb had rescued. "My son told me what you built," the letter read. I'm a retired contractor, and I've spent 40 years building houses for other people while feeling empty inside. What you've created with your hands and your will is more real than anything I ever constructed. I'd like to help if you'd allow it. Not to change what you're doing, but to support it. I have skills and resources that might be useful. Call me if you're interested." A phone number followed. Caleb thought about it for a week. Then he hiked to town and used the payphone outside Earl's store. Robert Chen answered on the second ring, and they talked for an hour. The result was a partnership that felt right. Robert would provide materials and expertise, Caleb would provide vision and labor, and together they'd improve the homestead without compromising its independence or spirit. Over the following months, Robert made several trips up to the camp, always respectful of boundaries, always treating Caleb as an equal rather than a kid to be managed. Together they built a better water system with proper gravity-fed pipes from the spring. They constructed a small greenhouse using reclaimed windows so Caleb could grow vegetables year-round. They improved the shelter's structure and added a sleeping loft and better insulation. They installed a small solar setup that could charge batteries and run LED lights without disturbing the essential character of the place. Robert never stayed long, and he never tried to convince Caleb to come back to civilization. "You've got something here that most people spend their whole lives looking for," he said during his last visit before winter. "Purpose, peace, freedom. Don't let anyone take that from you." Caleb's 17th birthday came and went unmarked, except by the changing leaves and the southward flight of geese. He was taller now, lean and strong, his face weathered beyond his years but his eyes clear and content. Jackson was getting older too, grey around the muzzle, slower on the trail, but still devoted, still present, still the best friend Caleb had ever had. The homestead had evolved into something remarkable. It was completely off-grid but comfortable, sustainable but constantly improving, isolated but connected to a community of supporters who believed in what it represented. Caleb had built a life that was entirely his own, shaped by his choices and his effort, beholden to no one. Word continued to spread. Occasionally, hikers would accidentally find their way to the general area, hoping for a glimpse of the legendary wild boy. Caleb usually avoided them, but sometimes he'd help if they were lost or in trouble, always maintaining his boundaries, always protecting his space. A few times, young people showed up asking if they could stay, if he'd teach them, if they could escape to the mountains too. He always sent them away gently but firmly. "This is my path," he'd tell them. "You have to find your own." Documentary filmmakers reached out. Book publishers. Motivational speakers who wanted him to tell his story on stage. He turned them all down. This wasn't about fame or inspiration or becoming a symbol. It was about living deliberately and honestly and free. The moment it became performance, it would stop being real. But he did agree to one more interview, this time for a podcast that focused on alternative lifestyles and intentional living. The host asked him the question everyone wanted answered: "Do you ever regret it? Do you ever wish you'd stayed in the normal world?" Caleb's answer was immediate and certain. "Not for a second. I lost everything. Family, home, the future everyone said I was supposed to have. And in losing it, I found this. I found out I could take care of myself. I found out that happiness doesn't come from having things. It comes from doing work that matters and living in alignment with your values. I found out that the world is bigger and more beautiful than any screen can show you. Most people are so busy trying to make a living that they forget to make a life. I'm making a life. That's worth everything I gave up." The seasons turned. Summer heat and autumn color and winter snow and spring renewal, the cycle repeating. Each year deepening Caleb's connection to the land and to himself. He turned 18 in the second spring, legally an adult now, beyond the reach of the systems that might have reclaimed him. He celebrated by planting an apple tree orchard, a dozen saplings that wouldn't bear fruit for years, but represented faith in a future here. Roots going down deep. Jackson passed away peacefully in his sleep during the third winter, old age finally claiming what the coyote trap hadn't. Caleb buried him on a hillside overlooking the camp, marked the grave with a cairn of stones, and grieved deeply for the friend who'd been with him since the beginning, who'd never doubted or judged or failed him. For weeks the homestead felt empty, in a way it never had before. But gradually, the pain softened into gratitude for the years they'd had. for the companionship that had sustained him through the hardest times. In spring, a new dog found him, or he found her, a young mutt abandoned on a forest road, half-starved and frightened. Caleb nursed her back to health, and she stayed, filling the Jackson-shaped hole with her own personality, less serious than the old hound, but equally devoted. He named her Hope, because that's what she represented, the ongoing possibility of connection and renewal, the way life continues even after loss. People still talk about Caleb Morrison in the valleys around Coalfield County. To some, he's a cautionary tale. To others, he's a hero. To most, he's just an interesting story about the kid who went to the mountains and never came back. But to a growing number of people around the country and the world who've heard his story, he's proof that there's another way to live, that the systems we're born into aren't mandatory, that freedom and happiness are still possible for those willing to work for them and brave enough to walk away from everything else. The homestead endures, hidden in the high country above Copper Creek, a paradise built from nothing by a boy and his dog, maintained by hard work and deep commitment, and the understanding that wealth has nothing to do with money and everything to do with waking up every morning in a place you built with your own hands, doing work that matters, living exactly the life you choose. Paradise isn't something you find or something you're given. It's something you create one day at a time, one choice at a time, with whatever materials and skills and courage you can muster. That's what Caleb learned. That's what he built. That's what he offers to anyone willing to see that being left with nothing can be the beginning of everything. If Caleb's story moved you, if it made you question what you really need to be happy or inspired you to think about living more deliberately, do me a favor right now. Hit that like button, subscribe to this channel, and make sure you activate the notifications bell so you never miss stories like this. Real stories about real people choosing extraordinary paths. And drop a comment below. What would your paradise look like if you built it from scratch? What would you be willing to let go of to live a life that's completely yours? Share this video with someone who needs to hear that it's possible to start over, to build something beautiful from nothing, to choose freedom over comfort. Your engagement keeps these stories alive and helps them reach people who need them. Thanks for listening, thanks for being here, and remember, you're closer to your own paradise than you think. Sometimes it just takes the courage to walk toward it.